Lieutenant Giuseppe Benedetto clutched his rifle with trembling hands as the British Eighth Army's artillery thundered across the North African desert near El Alamein. The date was October 23, 1942, and the Italian Ariete Armored Division was crumbling like ancient parchment under Montgomery's relentless assault. Sand mixed with blood as Giuseppe watched his comrades fall around him, their dreams of a new Roman Empire evaporating in the scorching heat. The battle had raged for days, and Giuseppe knew the end was near. His unit, once proud soldiers of Mussolini's African campaign, now huddled in makeshift trenches as British tanks rolled forward like steel behemoths. The sound of approaching footsteps made him look up to see a tall British sergeant approaching with his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Surrender, mate," the sergeant called out in broken Italian. "It's over." Giuseppe dropped his weapon and raised his hands skyward. Around him, dozens of other Italian soldiers emerged from their positions, their faces etched with defeat and uncertainty. They had heard stories of Allied brutality, of prisoners shot without mercy, of men disappearing into the desert never to be seen again. Fear coursed through their veins as they were herded together like cattle. The journey to the prisoner collection point took 3 days across the unforgiving desert. Giuseppe marched alongside his fellow captives, including his best friend Marco Rossellini from Naples and the philosophical sergeant Antonio Marcelli from Rome. They spoke in hushed whispers about their families back home, wondering if they would ever see the rolling hills of Tuscany or hear their mothers' voices again. As documented in L'Idea magazine's historical research, the camps were almost paradise to Italian prisoners, who were kept in clean barracks, had hot showers, an abundance of food, and could spend money they saved from work at the local PX. But Giuseppe could not have imagined such treatment as he was loaded onto a transport ship bound for America. The voyage across the Atlantic lasted 2 weeks. Giuseppe spent his time writing letters he could never send and sketching the faces of his fellow prisoners in a small notebook he had hidden from the guards. The ship creaked and groaned as it battled through storms that seemed to mirror the turmoil in his heart. He dreamed of his family's vineyard in Tuscany, where his father grew grapes that turned into wine so sweet it could make angels weep. When they finally reached the American coast in November 1942, Giuseppe was amazed by the sight of the Statue of Liberty rising from the harbor. Even as a prisoner, he felt something stirring in his chest, a strange sense of hope that he had not experienced since leaving Italy. The American guards who met them at the dock were different from what he had expected. They were firm but not cruel, professional but not heartless. The train journey to Texas took 3 days, and Giuseppe watched the American landscape roll past his window with wonder. The vast prairies, the endless skies, and the small towns that dotted the countryside reminded him of his homeland. Yet everything seemed bigger, more expansive than anything he had ever imagined. As they approached their destination, Camp Hereford in the Texas Panhandle, Giuseppe could not have predicted that this place would become something he would later describe as almost paradise, compared to the harsh realities of war he had left behind. The train whistle echoed across the flat Texas plains as Giuseppe and his fellow Italian prisoners arrived at Camp Hereford on November 15, 1942. The sight that greeted them was unlike anything they had imagined. Instead of the brutal concentration camps they had feared, they saw orderly rows of barracks, clean facilities, and American guards who treated them with a respect that bordered on kindness. Camp Commandant Colonel William Harrison, a stern but fair man from Oklahoma, addressed the new arrivals in the camp's main assembly hall. His translator, Sergeant Michael O'Brien, who had learned Italian during his years in Rome before the war, conveyed the colonel's words with precision. The prisoners would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. They would receive 3 meals a day, medical care, and the opportunity to work for wages. Giuseppe could hardly believe his ears as he listened to the camp regulations. According to the Texas State Historical Association's records, the Hereford camp contained 2,580 Italian POWs and was built to standard specifications with military barracks covered by tar paper or corrugated sheet iron. But what struck Giuseppe most was not the physical structure of the camp, but the humanity with which they were treated. His first night in Barrack 7 was a revelation. The building was heated, the beds had clean mattresses, and there were actual showers with hot water. Giuseppe's bunkmate, Private Roberto Salvatore from Sicily, wept openly as he felt hot water cascade over his body for the first time in months. They had endured sandstorms, dysentery, and constant fear in North Africa, but here they found something they had not dared hope for: dignity. The mess hall was another surprise. Breakfast consisted of scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, and real coffee, not the bitter chicory they had grown accustomed to in the desert. Giuseppe watched in amazement as American soldiers served them food that was better than what many Italian civilians were eating back home during the war. Marco Rossellini, his friend from Naples, whispered that this must be some kind of dream. Within days, the prisoners were assigned work details. Giuseppe, who had been a mechanic in civilian life, was assigned to the motor pool where he would maintain American military vehicles. The irony was not lost on him. He was now helping to maintain the very machines that had been used to defeat his own army. But the American mechanics who supervised him, particularly a Jovly man named Sergeant Tom Rodriguez from San Antonio, treated him as an equal rather than an enemy. The work was honest and rewarding. Giuseppe earned 20 cents per day, which he could spend at the camp's post exchange on cigarettes, candy, or writing materials. He began to send letters home through the International Red Cross, telling his family that he was safe and well treated. His mother, Maria Benedetto, would later write that she could hardly believe the conditions he described. As the weeks passed, Giuseppe began to understand why some of his fellow prisoners whispered that Camp Hereford was almost like paradise compared to what they had expected. The American guards were professional, but not hostile. The camp had a library with books in Italian, a recreation hall where prisoners could play cards and listen to music, and even a small chapel where they could attend Mass conducted by Father Patrick Donnelly, an Irish-American chaplain who spoke fluent Italian. The transformation in Giuseppe was remarkable. The man who had arrived broken and defeated was slowly rediscovering his humanity in this unlikely place. As winter settled over the Texas Panhandle, he began to understand that sometimes paradise could be found in the most unexpected places, even behind barbed wire in a land far from home. Spring 1943 brought dramatic changes to Camp Hereford that would alter the lives of Giuseppe and his fellow prisoners forever. On September 8, 1943, Italy had signed the Armistice of Cassibile, effectively switching sides in the war. The news reached Camp Hereford 3 days later, creating chaos, confusion, and ultimately opportunity among the Italian prisoners. Colonel Harrison called a general assembly in the camp's main hall on September 11th. The translator, Sergeant O'Brien, delivered the momentous news that would split the camp's population down the middle. Italy had surrendered to the Allies, and all Italian prisoners were now being offered a choice that would define the rest of their captivity and possibly their lives. Giuseppe listened intently as the terms were explained. Those who pledged to cooperate with the United States would be allowed to join Italian service units working alongside American forces in a quasi-military capacity. They would receive better treatment, improved quarters, American military uniforms, and increased pay. Those who refused would remain as traditional prisoners of war with the basic protections of the Geneva Convention. The decision was not an easy one for many of the prisoners. Giuseppe found himself torn between loyalty to his homeland and the practical realities of his situation. His friend Marco Rossellini from Naples was adamant about joining the service units, arguing that Mussolini had betrayed Italy and led them into disaster. But Antonio Marcelli, the philosophical sergeant from Rome, believed that joining the Americans would be a betrayal of their military oaths. According to historical records from the Wikipedia documentation of prisoner of war camps, approximately 90% of Italian POWs pledged to help the United States by volunteering in Italian service units, and due to a labor shortage, these units worked on army depots, in arsenals and hospitals, and on farms, receiving better housing, uniforms, and pay. Giuseppe would eventually become part of this overwhelming majority. The camp was physically divided to separate the cooperators from the non-cooperators, who were called nons, non-cooperating. The nons were moved to a separate compound with increased security and restrictions, while those who joined the Italian service units were given privileges that made their imprisonment feel more like voluntary service. Giuseppe made his decision on September 20th, after days of soul-searching and long conversations with his fellow prisoners. He raised his hand during the morning roll call and declared his willingness to cooperate with American forces. The moment he did, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was not betrayal, he told himself, but survival and an opportunity to contribute positively to ending the war. The transformation was immediate and remarkable. Giuseppe was issued an American military uniform with special Italian service unit patches. His new barracks were more comfortable, with better heating and improved facilities. Most importantly, he was assigned to work at the nearby Hereford Army Depot, where his mechanical skills were put to good use maintaining vehicles that would eventually support the Allied liberation of his homeland. The work at the depot gave Giuseppe a sense of purpose he had not felt since his capture. Under the supervision of Master Sergeant Robert Jackson from Georgia, he worked alongside American mechanics to keep trucks, jeeps, and other military vehicles in perfect running condition. The Americans treated him as a valued colleague rather than a former enemy, and Giuseppe began to develop friendships that would last long after the war ended. His letters home during this period reflected his changing perspective. He wrote to his family about the respect he received from his American supervisors, the quality of the food, and the unexpected kindness of his captors. His sister Angela would later say that his letters from this period sounded like they came from a different person entirely, someone who had found hope and purpose in the most unlikely circumstances. As 1943 drew to a close, Giuseppe realized that his initial assessment had been correct. For an Italian prisoner of war in 1943 America, Camp Hereford truly was almost paradise. The winter of 1943 to 1944 marked a turning point in Giuseppe's experience at Camp Hereford. His work with the Italian service unit had evolved from simple vehicle maintenance to complex mechanical projects that directly supported the war effort against Nazi Germany. The irony was profound. Giuseppe Benedetto, former soldier of Mussolini's army, was now helping to build the machines that would liberate his homeland from German occupation. His supervisor, Master Sergeant Robert Jackson, had grown to trust Giuseppe implicitly. Jackson, a gruff man from rural Georgia who had initially been skeptical of working with former enemy soldiers, now relied on Giuseppe's mechanical expertise for the most challenging repairs. Their relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship, built on mutual respect and shared craftsmanship. The dynamics within Camp Hereford had also stabilized. The majority of Italian prisoners had joined the service units, while the hardcore fascists and non-cooperators remained in the restricted compound. Giuseppe rarely saw his former comrade Antonio Marcelli, who had chosen to remain with the nuns and was now confined to the more restrictive sections of the camp. The philosophical sergeant from Rome had stuck to his principles. But Giuseppe wondered if Marcelli's definition of honor was worth the cost of isolation and harsh treatment. Giuseppe's friend, Marco Rossellini, had thrived in the new environment. The Neapolitan had been assigned to work in the camp kitchen, where his natural charm and cooking skills made him popular with both Italian prisoners and American guards. Marco had begun experimenting with American ingredients, creating fusion dishes that combined his grandmother's recipes with local Texas flavors. His chicken-fried steak with herbs reminded Giuseppe of his mother's cotoletta alla Milanese. The mail system had become more efficient for service unit members. Giuseppe received letters from home more regularly, and the news was not encouraging. Northern Italy remained under German occupation, and his family's letters spoke of food shortages, partisan warfare, and the constant fear of reprisals. His younger brother Paolo had joined the Italian resistance, fighting in the mountains near their hometown. Giuseppe felt both pride and terror at this news. In February 1944, a significant event occurred that would reshape Giuseppe's understanding of his situation. A group of German prisoners was briefly transferred to Camp Hereford, creating immediate tensions with the Italian service unit members. The Germans, still loyal to the Nazi cause, viewed the cooperating Italians as traitors and began a campaign of intimidation and violence. The situation came to a head on February 23rd, when a German prisoner attacked Giuseppe with a makeshift knife during evening meal preparation. Giuseppe defended himself, and the fight quickly escalated into a riot between German and Italian prisoners. American guards intervened quickly, but not before several men were injured. Colonel Harrison made the decision to transfer all German prisoners to other facilities within 48 hours. The incident had an unexpected positive effect on Giuseppe's relationship with his American captors. Master Sergeant Jackson and other American personnel had witnessed Giuseppe's courage during the confrontation and his restraint in not retaliating after the immediate threat was over. Jackson later told Giuseppe that he had shown the qualities of a true soldier: courage, discipline, and honor. Spring brought new opportunities for the Italian service units. Giuseppe was selected to participate in a special program that allowed trusted prisoners to work on local farms during planting season. The program was designed to address the severe labor shortage in American agriculture, but for Giuseppe, it represented something more valuable: a chance to experience American civilian life. He was assigned to work on the Henderson Ranch, owned by William and Mary Henderson, a childless couple in their 50s who farmed wheat and raised cattle. The Hendersons treated Giuseppe with a kindness that exceeded even the generous standards of Camp Hereford. They invited him to eat meals at their kitchen table, asked about his family in Italy, and showed genuine interest in his pre-war life as a mechanic. Mary Henderson, a devout Methodist, reminded Giuseppe of his own mother with her gentle manner and insistence on feeding anyone who entered her home. She taught him English phrases while he helped with farm chores, and she carefully packed lunch baskets that included homemade cookies and fresh milk. Giuseppe began to understand that American generosity was not just policy, but came from something deeper in the national character. The work on the Henderson Ranch was physically demanding but spiritually rewarding. Giuseppe felt connected to the land in a way he had not experienced since leaving his family's vineyard in Tuscany. As he operated American tractors and learned modern farming techniques, he began to envision a future beyond the war. Perhaps even a future that might include this strange, generous country that had given him sanctuary when he most needed it. By summer 1944, Giuseppe had begun to understand why he and so many of his fellow prisoners described Camp Hereford as almost paradise. It was not just the physical comfort or the respectful treatment, it was the opportunity to rediscover their humanity and find hope for the future in the darkest period of their lives. Summer 1944 brought Giuseppe Benedetto experiences that would forever change his understanding of America and Americans. His work program with the Henderson Ranch had expanded to include 3 days per week on the farm and 3 days at the Army Depot, giving him unprecedented exposure to civilian American life. The trust shown to him by both his military supervisors and civilian employers was something he could never have imagined during his darkest days in North Africa. The relationship with William and Mary Henderson had deepened into something approaching adoption. The childless couple had begun treating Giuseppe like the son they never had, teaching him not just farming techniques, but also American customs, humor, and values. Mary Henderson had taken it upon herself to improve Giuseppe's English. conducting informal lessons during lunch breaks that covered everything from proper grammar to American slang. Giuseppe's mechanical skills had become legendary both at the depot and on the ranch. Master Sergeant Jackson had recommended him for advanced training in diesel engines, making him one of the most technically skilled prisoners in the entire camp system. His expertise was now being used to train other Italian service unit members, giving him a leadership role that restored much of his self-respect. The mail from home continued to bring mixed news. His family had survived the German occupation, but his brother Paolo had been wounded while fighting with the partisans in the mountains. Giuseppe's father wrote that their vineyard had been damaged during fighting between German forces and Italian resistance fighters, but the family was working to rebuild. Most importantly, Allied forces were advancing through Italy, and liberation seemed finally within reach. Giuseppe's friend Marco Rossellini had achieved a remarkable transformation of his own. The former Italian soldier had become head cook for the service unit dining facility and had developed such a reputation for culinary excellence that Colonel Harrison had begun inviting visiting dignitaries to sample Marco's Italian-American fusion cuisine. Marco had even been featured in a local newspaper article about the successful integration of Italian prisoners into American society. The social dynamics within Camp Hereford had evolved significantly by mid-1944. Many of the Italian service unit members had developed genuine friendships with American personnel. Giuseppe played bocce ball with Sergeant Rodriguez from the motor pool, attended English classes taught by Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell from the camp's education office, and even participated in a camp baseball team that competed against local civilian teams. These interactions had given Giuseppe insights into American society that few Europeans of his generation possessed. He learned about American democracy through conversations with guards who came from different backgrounds, farmers from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, teachers from California. Each brought different perspectives, but all shared certain common values of fairness, opportunity, and respect for individual dignity. The work program had been expanded in late summer to include emergency agricultural assistance. A severe drought had threatened local wheat crops, and Italian service unit members were volunteered to help save the harvest. Giuseppe found himself working 16-hour days alongside American farmers, German-American immigrants who had been in Texas for generations, and Mexican-American workers who had come north for seasonal employment. The experience of working side by side with this diverse group of Americans gave Giuseppe a new understanding of what made America different from the highly stratified societies of Europe. Here, a man was judged by his work, his character, and his contribution to the common good rather than by his birth, his family name, or his political connections. Giuseppe began to dream of someday becoming part of this society permanently. The autumn of 1944 brought news that would change everything. Allied forces had liberated Rome and were advancing rapidly through northern Italy. Giuseppe's hometown was now behind Allied lines, and his family was safe. For the first time since his capture, he could realistically begin to plan for his eventual repatriation to Italy. But as Giuseppe contemplated his return home, he found himself conflicted in ways he had never expected. Camp Hereford had indeed been almost paradise, but more than that, it had become home. The relationships he had built, the skills he had learned, and the values he had absorbed during his captivity had fundamentally changed him as a person. On September 30th, 1944, Giuseppe wrote a letter to his family that would shock them to their core. He told them that while he loved Italy and missed them terribly, he had decided to apply for permission to remain in the United States after the war ended. America, he wrote, had given him not just sanctuary, but a new life, and he wanted to repay that generosity by becoming an American citizen and contributing to the country that had shown him such unexpected kindness during his darkest hour. The decision would prove controversial among his fellow prisoners, but Giuseppe was certain it was the right choice for his future. Camp Hereford had been almost paradise, and now he wanted to make that paradise his permanent home. The spring of 1945 brought momentous changes to Camp Hereford that would test every relationship and conviction Giuseppe Benedetto had developed during his nearly 3 years of captivity. The war in Europe was clearly ending, with Allied forces closing in on Berlin from both east and west. For the Italian prisoners, this meant the long-awaited prospect of repatriation, but Giuseppe found himself dreading rather than anticipating his return to Italy. News of Mussolini's death on April 28th reached Camp Hereford within days, creating complex emotions among the Italian prisoners. The man who had led them into war and captivity was dead, executed by Italian partisans after attempting to flee to Switzerland. Giuseppe felt no sadness at the news, only a sense that a dark chapter in Italian history had finally closed. But the end of fascism also meant the end of the clear moral justification for remaining in America as an enemy of the fascist regime. Colonel Harrison called a General Assembly on May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, to address the future of the Italian service units. The war was over, he announced, and the process of repatriation would begin within months. However, he also revealed something that gave Giuseppe hope. The United States Congress was considering legislation that would allow certain prisoners of war to apply for permanent residency based on their service and integration into American society. Giuseppe's friend Marco Rossellini had made a decision similar to Giuseppe's. The talented cook from Naples had received an offer from a restaurant owner in nearby Amarillo to remain as head chef after the war ended. Marco had written to his family explaining his decision, and their response had been understanding, if not enthusiastic. His mother had written that she wanted him to be happy, even if it meant living across an ocean from his family. The situation with the non-cooperating prisoners had become increasingly complicated. Men like Antonio Marcelli, who had remained loyal to fascist principles throughout their captivity, now faced an uncertain future. Italy was rebuilding as a democracy, but these men had spent years in isolation, missing the opportunity to adapt and integrate that had been offered to the service unit members. Giuseppe felt both pity and frustration for his former comrade. Giuseppe's relationship with the Henderson family had evolved into something approaching formal adoption. William Henderson had approached Colonel Harrison about sponsoring Giuseppe for permanent residency and eventual citizenship. Mary Henderson had begun teaching Giuseppe advanced English and American history, preparing him for the citizenship examination he hoped to take someday. Their support meant everything to Giuseppe, providing the family connection he would need to navigate American immigration procedures. Master Sergeant Jackson had become another crucial advocate. The Georgia mechanic had written formal recommendations praising Giuseppe's technical skills, work ethic, and character. Jackson had even offered Giuseppe a position with his planned post-war auto repair business in Atlanta. Having such support from military personnel would carry significant weight with immigration officials. The process of applying for permanent residency proved more complex than Giuseppe had anticipated. He needed to demonstrate not only his value to American society, but also his complete renunciation of fascist ideology. FBI investigators interviewed him multiple times, examining his military service record, his conduct during captivity, and his relationships with American personnel. The investigation was thorough but fair, and Giuseppe felt confident that his record would speak for itself. Giuseppe's English had improved dramatically during his years at Camp Hereford. He now spoke with only a slight accent and could read American newspapers, technical manuals, and literature with ease. His mechanical skills had advanced to the point where he could troubleshoot complex problems that stymied some American technicians. These abilities would serve him well in civilian life. The emotional challenges of his decision were more difficult than the practical ones. Giuseppe wrote long letters to his family in Italy, trying to explain why he felt called to remain in America. His mother's letters in response were heartbreaking. She understood his reasoning, but mourned the fact that she might never see her son again. Giuseppe's father was more practical, acknowledging that post-war Italy would offer limited opportunities for a young man with Giuseppe's skills and ambitions. In August 1945, Giuseppe received the news he had been hoping for. His application for permanent residency had been approved. He would be among the first Italian prisoners of war to legally remain in the United States as a civilian resident. The news was celebrated by his American friends and supporters, but Giuseppe felt a mixture of joy and melancholy. He had achieved his dream, but at the cost of leaving behind everything and everyone he had known before the war. The final days at Camp Hereford were bittersweet. Giuseppe watched as most of his fellow prisoners prepared for repatriation, packing the few belongings they had accumulated during their years of captivity. Many promised to stay in touch, but Giuseppe knew that most of these friendships would fade as the men returned to their old lives in Italy. On September 15, 1945, Giuseppe walked out of Camp Hereford as a free man and legal resident of the United States. He carried a small suitcase containing his few possessions, letters of recommendation from his American employers, and the address of a boarding house in Amarillo where he would begin his new life. Behind him lay almost 3 years in a place he had once called almost paradise. Ahead lay the challenge of making that paradise his permanent home. Giuseppe Benedetto stood at the gates of Camp Hereford for the last time on September 15, 1945, no longer as a prisoner of war but as a free resident of the United States of America. The transformation from captured enemy soldier to legal immigrant represented one of the most remarkable personal journeys of the Second World War, a testament to the power of American ideals and the resilience of the human spirit. His first destination was the Henderson Ranch, where William and Mary Henderson waited to welcome him not as a temporary worker, but as a permanent member of their extended family. The elderly couple had prepared a small apartment in their farmhouse where Giuseppe would live while he established himself in civilian life. The gesture moved Giuseppe to tears, reminding him of the extraordinary generosity that Americans had shown him since his arrival as a broken prisoner nearly 3 years earlier. Giuseppe's first job as a civilian was at Henderson Motors, a new auto repair business that William Henderson had helped finance in Amarillo. Giuseppe's reputation as a skilled mechanic had preceded him, and within weeks he had established himself as one of the most capable automotive technicians in the Texas Panhandle. His ability to work on both American and foreign vehicles made him invaluable in the post-war economy. The transition to civilian life was not without challenges. Giuseppe struggled with loneliness, missing both his family in Italy and the close-knit community of his fellow prisoners at Camp Hereford. He maintained correspondence with Marco Rossellini, who had also remained in Texas and was building a successful restaurant career in Dallas. Their friendship provided continuity and support during the difficult early months of freedom. Giuseppe's mechanical skills and work ethic quickly earned him recognition throughout the region. By 1947, he had saved enough money to purchase a partnership in Henderson Motors, and by 1950, he owned the business outright. His success attracted attention from other Italian Americans in Texas, and Giuseppe became a leader in the small but growing Italian American community in Amarillo. The process of bringing his family to America began in 1948. Giuseppe had maintained regular correspondence with his parents and siblings in Italy, sending money to help them rebuild their vineyard and restore their lives after the war. His success in America had convinced his younger brother Paolo to immigrate as well, and by 1951, Giuseppe had sponsored Paolo's immigration to Texas. Giuseppe married in 1952, wedding Maria Costanza, a second-generation Italian-American woman from San Antonio whose family had immigrated in the 1920s. Their wedding was a celebration that brought together Giuseppe's American friends from his prisoner of war days, his new Italian-American community, and Maria's extended family. Master Sergeant Jackson served as best man, cementing a friendship that had begun in the most unlikely circumstances. By 1955, Giuseppe and Maria had 3 children and had purchased a substantial farm outside Amarillo. Giuseppe had achieved the American dream through a path that few could have imagined. From enemy prisoner to successful businessman and respected community leader, His story became well known in Texas, and he was often invited to speak about his experiences during the war. Giuseppe never forgot the lessons he learned at Camp Hereford. He believed that America's greatness lay not in its military power or economic strength, but in its capacity for forgiveness, redemption, and second chances. He often told his children that America had given him everything: freedom, opportunity, family, and purpose, when he had every reason to expect nothing but punishment and despair. The former prisoner of war became a naturalized American citizen on July 4, 1956, in a ceremony in Amarillo attended by hundreds of friends and supporters. Among them were William and Mary Henderson, now in their 70s but still active in Giuseppe's life, and several of his former guards and supervisors from Camp Hereford. The ceremony was covered by local newspapers, which noted the remarkable transformation of the former Italian soldier into one of the community's most respected citizens. Giuseppe's success story was not unique among Italian prisoners who remained in America after the war. According to subsequent historical research, several hundred Italian POWs chose to remain in the United States, and most achieved significant success in their adopted country. Their experiences challenged conventional wisdom about prisoner of war treatment and demonstrated the power of humane policies in transforming enemies into allies. As Giuseppe aged, he often reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought him from the battlefields of North Africa to the prosperity and peace of post-war Texas. He maintained that Camp Hereford had indeed been almost paradise, not because of its physical amenities, but because it had offered something more precious than comfort: hope, dignity, and the chance for redemption. Giuseppe Benedetto passed away in 1998 at the age of 78, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched during his remarkable journey from prisoner of war to pillar of the American community. His story stands as enduring testimony to the transformative power of American ideals and the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to find paradise in the most unexpected places. In his final letter to his family in Italy, written shortly before his death, Giuseppe wrote, "I came to America as a defeated enemy soldier, expecting punishment and hardship. Instead, I found a nation that believes in second chances, a people who judge others by their actions rather than their origins, and a society that offered me the opportunity to become the man I was meant to be. Camp Hereford was almost paradise because America itself is almost paradise for those willing to embrace its values and contribute to its future."